I am an academic. I've published a lot in academic journals, and my wife says that anytime she's having trouble sleeping, she just gets out one of my journal articles, starts reading it, falls asleep immediately. But I also, over the years, have become less concerned and less interested in the traditional academic research, and much more interested in engaging with executives and engaging with companies to truly learn what the challenges that you all face and how you're best trying to manage within those challenges. And I say, as an academic, I was talking yesterday with my son and a friend of ours, and this friend of mine was saying, so what exactly do you do when you go to these companies? I said, well, I talk to a bunch of executives. I said, I don't do consulting because it seems really arrogant of me to walk into a company where somebody's been there 25 years and say, I know better than you how to do things. So I just talk about my research, and the things that we found from our research. And after this conversation, my son looked at me and he goes, you know what? I never knew what you did. Now he's 18 years old. Because I never knew you did. People would say, what's your dad do? I don't know, he's a professor. And so I got the opportunity to educate my son yesterday. Now he has a better idea of how I spend my day. So with that in mind, let's talk about this topic of aligning strategy, culture, and talent. Okay, and again, this is, I want to trace this back to Kevin. Kevin came and guest lectured in my class a couple of years ago, and he was talking about the idea of the sweet spot is this link between strategy, culture, and talent. Okay, and at the time I thought, that's really fascinating, but what does that mean? And to be honest, he didn't go into detail about that. He said that if you get those three components of your organization aligned really well, because I just think that's what makes for an extremely successful organization. And so I've had a chance to think about that. So let me pose this question to you. We all know, I think we can accept the statement that aligning strategy, culture, and talent would be a good thing, but how would you do that? Aligned around what? How do you know what that alignment looks like? Again, you are exactly where I was when Kevin said the sweet spot is aligning those three things. I could not argue with that. It made all the sense in the world. But what it meant, I didn't really understand. And so the more that I thought about this, and I also say that I've been absolutely blessed to work with the best people in the world. So some of my thinking on this topic came from Dave Ulrich. How many of you know the name Dave Ulrich? Okay, yeah. So Dave's son was one of my PhD students. And I'll be working with Dave on the next round of his competency study. But when he was talking about culture one time, he really enlightened me as to some concepts around culture. And then I've worked with a number of chief HR officers around this whole idea of talent. And so as I bring these ideas to you today, I want to point out that I am not an original thinker. I am a stealer of ideas. Okay. Again, I've been blessed to work with really smart people, and all I try to do is take what they're saying and see if there's a way that we can integrate them to provide some insight to help you as people that actually do this to be able to do it well. So to answer that question, what I'd like to do today is essentially address four basic questions, and that is, what is strategy, right? If we're going to align strategy, culture, and talent, let's make sure we're clear on the definitions. I like to say that often the problem that we have when we communicate is that we all use the same vocabulary, but we use different dictionaries, right? So when I say talent, I have in my mind what I think talent is, and when you say talent, you have in your mind what you think talent is, and we're using the same word, but we mean completely different things. And so we want to get around definitions. My definitions may not be the right ones, but they're the ones that I want to use today to help you think about how you can align these things. So let's first answer, what is strategy? Second, what is culture? Third, what is talent? And then if we answer those well, hopefully that'll take us into this idea of how do we align all three of those in a way that is going to create competitive advantage for our organization. So we'll get to the first question. What is strategy? I like to use this definition that Robert Quinn, who was one of the early researchers in strategy. And he defines strategy as, take a deep breath, the pattern or plan that integrates an organization's major goals, policies, and action sequences into a cohesive whole. Now you all feel like you've got it, right? It's the pattern or plan that integrates an organization's major goals, policies, and action sequences into a cohesive whole. So I have to take a breath before I do that. Okay, and it's one of those things that, is technically correct, but of absolutely no value to you, right? And so when I talk about strategy, and again, I don't want to say this is the ideal definition of strategy, but particularly when we're talking about people who are thinking in terms of not just human resources, but in terms of how people fit within the strategy, I like to think of strategy as decisions about competition. So again, when Kevin Cox came and guest lectured in my class, he asked my students what is strategy. He said, strategy is about making choices. Okay, you're trying to make choices. Now, choices about what? And this is decisions. You're making decisions, and those decisions are all about competition. And I like to say, and we can argue about it, are these the only three questions? But I think these are the three main questions that every organization has to answer as part of their strategy. And that is, where are we going to compete? How are we going to compete? And with what are we going to compete? Now, what do I mean by where? Where in product markets? Where in industries? What industries are we going to be in? What product markets are we going to be in? What geographies are we going to be in? Okay, we as an organization have to decide where it is we're going to be. Second question is, how are we going to compete? And I'd say this is, what is that differentiating characteristic about our product or service that's going to make customers want to buy from us instead of from our competitors? Okay, what is that differentiating characteristic about our product or service that makes customers want to buy from us instead of from our competitors? Now, I like to tell this story because I love history, particularly when you think about the history within management. One of the earliest strategy books was by a guy named Michael Porter. Okay, and Michael Porter had this book that was called Competitive Strategy. It was really a foundational book around strategy. In that book, he laid out what's known as the 5 forces framework for understanding an industry. Is anybody familiar with the 5 forces framework? It's become commonplace, but almost integrated into a larger Pestel analysis. That's really just the industry component. But in that book, he was really concerned with what is it that determines the profitability of an industry, not of a company, but of an industry. What makes an industry where competitors within the industry will largely be profitable versus what are the characteristics of an industry where it's going to be very difficult for competitors within that industry to be profitable. Now, that was the larger part of his book, but he also had to say that within an industry, companies compete in different ways. And so he said there were 4 generic ways, what he called generic strategies, that companies could use to compete. And he said that was cost, being the low-cost competitor, differentiation, being differentiated in some way, focus, as really being good within a particular product niche, or stuck in the middle. Okay, so of those 4, he said stuck in the middle is not really a strategy. Stuck in the middle is trying to be both cost and differentiation at the same time. And if you try to do that, you'll find a competitor that will align all of their resources around cost, and they'll undersell you on cost. And you'll find a competitor that will align all of their resources around differentiation, and they will out-differentiate you. And so that is the worst place to be, is not good at anything, or not best at anything. So he said stuck in the middle is not really a strategy. Therefore, there's really only 3 strategies: cost, differentiation, and focus. Now, about 4 years later, he wrote a second book called Competitive Advantage. Now, why did he write a second book? I'm a cynical person. The reason he wrote a second book is because the consulting revenues from his first book had dried up. So, and this is actually the kind of horrible truth about publishing popular books, and that is that most people don't make money from the book. They make money from the consulting that comes from the book. Why? Because CEOs, what do they have very little of? Time. What do they have a lot of? Money, right? And so, and this is actually what a lot of authors will do, is that they will write a book, and then the first week the book comes out, they will buy 5,000 copies of their book. Okay, now why did they buy 5,000 copies of their book? Because that moves it up to like #1 business bestseller. Okay, now what do they do with those 5,000 copies? It doesn't sit in their garage. What they do is that they mail them to all of the CEOs, CFOs, CMOs, the executive team at all of these different large companies. Okay, now again, go back. If I'm a CEO and I get this book and I see it's a business bestseller, everybody must be reading it, but I don't have time to read it, so what do? Hire you to come in and tell me what's in the book. Right? Okay, and yeah, I mean, we laugh about this, but this is completely true. This is the way the game is played. Okay, so truly, about 4 years later, he came up with Competitive Advantage to restart his consulting business. Now, in that book, one of the things he said was that, well, the more that I've done consulting with companies around these kind of generic strategies, what occurred to me is that really focus is simply being cost or differentiation within a particular product niche. So really there are only 2 strategies, and that's cost or differentiation. Do you see where I'm going with this? There's really only one strategy, and it is differentiation. It's trying to say, how are you going to be different? It may be cost, that you're going to be the lowest cost producer within your industry. It may be innovation. It may be customer service. It may be quality. But it's trying to figure out, why is it that a customer wants to buy from you instead of from your competitor? What is that differentiating characteristic? All right, the last question is with what to compete. And that is, what are the processes, technologies, and people that we're going to need in order to create the capability to differentiate ourselves in this way, competing in these different markets. Okay, now, here's why I think this is interesting if you're people-focused, again, whether you're an HR or you're a line leader who understands the value of people. And that is that what often happens is that companies make bad decisions about where to compete or how to compete because they don't pay attention to with what to compete. Okay, because they think that's just execution. Okay? Execution is the easy part. Once we know where we're going to compete and how we're going to differentiate ourselves, the rest is just about getting it done within the organization. And that's the easy part. And that's what's the wrong assumption, right? Larry Bossidy, who was the CEO at Allied Signal, and Ram Charan wrote a book a number of years ago titled Execution. And in fact, the thesis of their book, here's coming from a CEO, is that actually the strategic decisions about where to compete and how to compete, that's the easiest part. The hardest part every organization faces is how to create the capability to execute that strategy. Okay, and I say you make bad decisions about this. A number of years ago, we were interviewing line leaders and asking them kind of this question about what's the role of people in your competitive advantage, and how does your HR function help facilitate that? And I was talking with the general manager of the largest business unit, most profitable business unit within this large multinational corporation, which will remain nameless. And so I remember asking him, I said something about, so what do you see as the role for HR in strategy formulation? And he looked at me like I was an alien from another planet. He's like, why would I want HR involved in my strategy? I said, well, they may know something about the labor market that would be valuable and might limit what kinds of things you could do. So, I mean, you may say you want to grow like crazy, but they may have information on the labor market to say, you know, we can't actually fuel that growth because there aren't enough people out there that we could bring in to be able to create this level of production. And he looked at me and it was like, you know, obviously you're the academic, because if we need the people, we'll get the people. Right? That's just an execution question. About a year later, I'm talking with the head of HR at that company. I said, so how are things going there? He goes, it's really interesting. Because our leaders are realizing that we can't just go out and hire 500 engineers this year. And so now we've had to scale back our growth plan because we can't get enough people to fuel that growth. I'm like, wow, I'm surprised that will happen in your company. Right? Again, with what to compete? How to execute that. And we'll talk about this again. Keep in mind this idea of a capability. What is the capability that we need? So if we're going to differentiate ourselves around customer service, how do we create the capability in the organization to deliver that customer service? If we're going to differentiate ourselves in terms of innovation, how do we create an innovation capability within our company? Okay, and so this takes us into the idea of capability. So when we talk about strategy, these are really the big questions that every company has to ask and answer. And then it takes us into three things to keep in mind about strategy. And that is that, first of all, it's about delivering valued outcomes to the customer. What is it that we're offering? Second is it's about making trade-offs. Again, go back to stuck in the middle is not a good strategy. We can't be all things to all people. We have to be best at something. Better than our competitors at something. And last, it's about creating alignment. Once we've decided what it is we're going to be best at, we have to align everything within the organization to create the capability to deliver that. Okay? So, takes us to our next question. What is culture? Okay. And this is a very difficult one because culture is one of those topics that everybody's getting interested in right now. Particularly in the U.S., we've been working with board members. We keep hearing members of the board of directors. And now all of a sudden they're really focused on culture because of a number of things that have gone on. And not just in the U.S., but that have gone on globally. And so get into this question of what is culture. Think about this as kind of a thought experiment. And that is, what are some of the companies, and you have to answer this, but what are some companies that you think of that have really strong cultures? Okay, so just keep that in mind. Again, you can all think of a particular company that you're aware of that you think has a really strong culture. Now that you've got that company in mind, what is it about their culture that makes you think it's a strong culture? Okay. What is it about that company's culture? Describe it. What is it about that company's culture that leads you to believe it has a strong culture? And then last is, what aspect of that culture do you think is most important? Okay, and this is where, again, I'm going to move into talking about some ideas that Dave Ulrich sparked as I was thinking about this concept of how do we align strategy, culture, and talent. So what are some, in the US, here are a number of companies, and if I ask my students, I said, so what are companies that have strong cultures? They would probably list a number of these companies. Some of them you're aware of, probably some of them you're not. But in any case, all of these companies are known for strong cultures. Now, if you go to that next question, it's kind of what is it about that culture that's important? And it leads you to believe that. If you look at Zappos, if I ask my students again, and often as the students come in, we'll have our next class of students coming in about a month, and I do a session on them, a session with them about kind of the future, kind of the landscape of the HR field. And I'll always ask them about, what do you think are great companies? And every time students go to Zappos. Okay, and they'll say, what makes you think it's a great company? We'll say, well, the culture. Okay, so what about the culture? We'll say the customer service. They have great customer service. Okay? Next one. Okay, REI, outdoors. Okay, this is a retail company that does sells a lot of outdoor things, hiking boots, hiking materials, all the things that you would do, tents and so on. It's about their culture of outdoors. Southwest Airlines in the US, everybody points to it's around service and fun. Chick-fil-A is around service. This is a quick service restaurant. If you ever go to the United States and eat at a Chick-fil-A, mostly in the South and Southeast, you'll be surprised that when you walk in, it'll be like, it's a pleasure to serve you today. What can I get for you? Everyone is like that. It's very service-oriented. Adobe is around innovation and change. Samsung is around innovation. And Johnson & Johnson is around integrity with customers. Okay, we talk about a number of stories of Johnson & Johnson where if you go back to their credo, their kind of operating cultural philosophy, and they say, here are the 4 groups that we have to serve. And the first one is the doctors, nurses, and patients that use our products. The next is the communities in which we do business. The third is our employees and managers. And the fourth is our shareholders. And they say if we do all of these things, then, and you get to the last part, it says, if this is actually the priorities that we use. And if we put our customers and the people who use our products first, what that means is that we'll get a fair return to our shareholders. Okay, so it's not about driving shareholder value, it's about driving customer value. And if we drive customer value, shareholders are going to make money. And that's what leads them to have much more integrity, because they're worried about making money so much as they're worried about serving their customers. Okay, so again, some data on, if you look at the number of the consulting firms, they'll talk about the data that they've generated showing that firms that have strong cultures outperform firms that don't have strong cultures. But here's the question, are all cultures good? What do you think? Are all cultures good? Just to have a strong culture, does that mean a company is going to be successful? I'll give you a couple of examples. So, Nike's been in trouble recently for a number of things. But Nike, if you read about them about a year or two ago, they were in all kinds of trouble because a number of their female employees were talking about the fact that it was a very sexist culture. They didn't have the same opportunities to be promoted. Okay, now why did that happen? Well, think about Nike. It's an athletic company. It was very male-dominated. It was very masculine-dominated, not just male-dominated, but very masculine environment. And they would get into doing things that were just, for instance, Nike would have, they might have a meeting at a strip club, with naked women. Now, if you're a woman, how much do you want to attend that meeting? Right? And this is that kind of sexist culture that emerged at Nike that made it difficult for women to have an equal opportunity to move ahead in the organization. So, again, it's a strong culture, but is it a good culture? Second example, Wells Fargo, big banking system, my bank, of course. And this is what's driven a lot of boards to focusing on culture right now. But Wells Fargo got into a lot of trouble because they were creating an incentive system that was based on the number of new accounts that you opened as a bank. Okay, and so if you didn't meet your quota, then you didn't get a bonus. And so managers at the bank level were pushing all of their personal bankers to increase the number of new accounts. And so what ended up happening is that these personal bankers would create fake accounts. And they would, it could be me as a customer, that they would create an account for me that I never asked for. Because that's how they would meet their goal. It was this results at all cost culture that had developed within Wells Fargo. Okay, and the CEO's been fired, most of the executive team has been fired, a number of the board members have been fired, and everyone looked to the fact that it was the culture at Wells Fargo that drove these dysfunctional decisions. And then last, I apologize. again, I will ask the GE people about this, right? Because GE has faced a number of struggles. And some of those came from the culture that had developed within GE. Now, I say this, again, I've been affiliated with GE for 25 years. And it is clearly one of the most admired companies. And they have been extremely successful over time. And yet, over the last few years, they have stumbled considerably. Okay, so we can't deny the fact that they've stumbled. No one will. So what was the cause of that stumble? Right? I don't know if any GE people want to say, what about the culture at GE do you think may have contributed to some of the problems that the corporation has faced? I remember when Jack Welch was a CEO, and I had a colleague that I worked really, he was actually one of my PhD students that left GE after about 25 years to come get his PhD. And he always talked about that at GE, when Jack Welch was there, there was the meeting before the meeting, right? That Jack would always come about 10 minutes late to the meeting. And then at that 10 minutes that Jack was not there, that's where the real conflicts would come. That people would call one another out. They would, there was no yes culture. It was, I'm going to tell you what's wrong with you, you tell me what's wrong with me, let's get it all out on the table. And then Jack would show up and it'd be like, okay, great. So we're not going to undermine one another in front of Jack, but the conflict will exist. We will raise these issues. They will happen. And if you've read some of the articles about GE, it very much became a yes culture, where people were afraid to say no, afraid to ask questions. Really, in fact, there was an article I was reading where they talked about the board of directors and how the board of directors really never pushed back at all on some of the things that Jeff Immelt was doing. And my favorite quote is, one new board member sits through his first board meeting, and at the end of it, he asked one of the board members, so what is the role of a board member at GE? And the answer was, applause. Okay, so the board was not there to ask questions and force thinking. It was there to say, great, you're doing great, you're doing great. Okay, and so again, and I have great confidence GE is going to recover from all of this, but it's this kind of insular culture. We're just looking inside. We're not looking at what's going outside. And what's going on in our industry? What's going on in the power industry? Okay, that might say, just because we're GE, it doesn't mean that when we make this big acquisition, it's going to be a successful one. So I'll give you this definition of culture. Ed Schein is one of the founders, kind of the original researchers around culture. But forget about the wording here. What he's basically saying is that it is that kind of agreed upon, an informally agreed upon way of doing things. The way that we handle our external environment, in terms of our customers, our shareholders, our communities. How do we approach them? And our internal integration. How do we deal with one another? Okay, how do we interact with one another? What are the norms that are the way that we want to communicate and treat one another? And this is kind of the model of culture, and that is we kind of start with these basic underlying assumptions. So our purpose, vision, mission statement, what is it that we think is important, and what is it that we think is right? And we move up to the espoused values, so we could talk about innovation, service, integrity, teamwork, all of those things. And at the top are what we call the artifacts, and that's, what does it look like? What do our reward systems look like? Our communication systems, our training, our punishment. How do those artifacts of things that really happen in the organization integrate with the culture? Okay, and the idea here is that any of these could be out of alignment, right? If we have a good culture, what it means is that we have these foundational assumptions that tie into the values we've got that are supported by the systems and processes we've got. But often, what happens over time is that we might try to develop a culture that's not really our culture. So a number of years ago, I got brought in by IBM when they were going to go through a cultural change, and they had an internal committee that was supposed to be in charge of this, and I was the appointed academic, and that they asked to be kind of an observer. And I remember the line executive who was in charge of the committee started off the meeting by saying, look at these values that we've got on our wall. That's not IBM. Okay, we have these values, we say these are the IBM values, but if you look at the way we function today, we don't live those values. So our task is to figure out what is the true culture. What are the true values of IBM? So again, how attractive is this culture sound? Bruising, relentless, painful, frequent combat, burn and churn. Anybody want to work for that company? Anybody know what that company is? Amazon. Okay. There was an article in the New York Times written about Amazon and its culture. And these were some of the words that people used to describe what it was like to work at Amazon. Okay, like this idea of purposeful Darwinism. Okay, we're really trying to create this survival of the fittest culture within Amazon. And so this is the interesting question, because Amazon is an extremely successful company. Okay, and this is a culture. Now, I remember when Microsoft was in a similar stage of their growth, and I had a friend who worked there, and he said that somebody asked him something about work-life balance at Microsoft. He said, "Oh, no, we've got a lot of freedom for work-life balance." He said, "We get to choose whatever 80 hours a week we work." Okay? And again, if you look at Microsoft, when they were on the upswing, that was the culture of Microsoft. Was you worked all the time. Now, why did you do that? My friend retired with $14 million, and he left $20 million on the table in unexercised stock options. So he worked there about 7 years, became a millionaire. So he was willing to work 80 hours to become rich. Okay, and I think a lot of Amazon executives, not the hourly workers, but executives, are willing to live in that culture. And so one of the things that a writer looking at this came up with, and they said, you know what? This is the culture that Amazon needs to deliver on its value proposition, right? If you're a customer of Amazon, what is it you want? Inexpensive, on time, consistent, reliable. So if you're going to deliver that, what is your culture going to be like? Very demanding of people. Okay, now, I'm guessing no one in the room wants to work for Amazon. Right? And I don't. I have no desire to work for Amazon. I don't want to work in a culture like that. But the point is that what Amazon's culture does is it promotes the customer value that they're trying to offer. And we may not like it, but there are employees that will buy into that because it's the best job they can get at $15 an hour. And so they're willing to not have the same bathroom breaks and so on because they'll make more money working at Amazon than they will somewhere where one of their other opportunities is. Okay? So, the idea here is that it's not necessarily that there's a good or a bad culture. It's, does the culture actually make your company successful? Now, it's good or bad for us as employees, and we decide we don't want to work in cultures that may not be good for us. But from the company perspective, it's about trying to create a culture that helps deliver your value proposition. Okay, so think about definition of talent. Again, years ago, we did a work with companies trying to say, so how do you think about talent? And it actually came up with 3 different approaches. The broadest definition was this idea of any individual has the capability to make a significant contribution to the current and future performance of the company. I was speaking at Shell's HR conference, and they had a new head of talent, and somebody asked him, how do we define talent at Shell? And he said, well, I haven't come up with a definition yet, but I don't want to define it in a way that it couldn't potentially include every person that works at Shell. Okay, not to mean that everybody is talent, but that you may be an admin, but if you're actually driving really high value for the company because what you're doing for your boss or your executive is making them successful, then you could be considered talent. Okay, so that's that broad view, and if that's the way you think about talent, then the key construct is engagement. Right? How do we get this broad group engaged? Which goes to your question. The second definition was what we'll call impact-based. And that is kind of who are the individuals or groups of individuals that drive a disproportionate impact on our success. Okay, and if that's the way we think about talent, then this is what we call strategic talent management. Okay, do we understand who the critical people at the critical jobs within our organization are? And those are where we focus our efforts around talent. And then the last definition was this leadership-based definition. It's the small percentage of employees at the top and those rising to the top. And if that's the way we're viewing talent, then this is where executive succession comes in. We'll talk a little bit about that. But again, different companies may have different definitions. A company may use all three definitions in different ways in terms of how they approach talent management within their organization. So to go to the broadest one first, I was just reading a book called Employees First, Customers Second, written by the CEO of HCLT. It's an Indian-based technology company. And he talks about the idea of the value zone. And one of his big discoveries was that there are people in the organization that really exist in the value zone. So he talked about that they're consultants that really focus on the interface of the customer. And they knew what customers want and they delivered value to customers. He said, you know what, as a CEO, I was not the one creating value. It was the employees in the value zone that were creating value for the company. Okay? And so he talked about the idea that if you're going to create value, differentiating value, engagement is critical. You have to have people that are aligned around the values and strategic objectives of the organization, that have trust, both in management is supportive of them, and in each other. We're able to collaborate with one another within the organization because we trust. Capability, that they actually have the skills necessary to deliver value to their customers. And then opportunity, that they have the flexibility to do what a customer needs. Okay, it's not that there's a standard operating procedure that we have to follow no matter whether or not that actually helps our customer. But that as an employee, I realize that if this is our procedure, but the customer needs this, and I need to deviate from that procedure, I should deviate from the procedure because it's about delivering value to the customer. And so again, this is just one of those research studies on how engagement drives different outcomes. And what you can see is that it's negatively related to things like absenteeism, turnover, and so on. It's negatively related to the things we want. The higher the engagement, the lower the turnover, the lower the absenteeism. It tends to be positively related to things that we want it to be positively related to. Customer metrics, productivity, sales, etc. Okay? Now, what are the challenges with this view? And that is, if you think about a number of these jobs that are kind of in the value zone, say lower in the organization, a lot of those are going to be threatened by AI, machine learning, all of the changes in technology. As we move to a number of consultants are going to be around for a while, but a number of activities that consultants engage in may be better addressed through an AI process, okay, or whatever those jobs are. So how do we deal with that? And really, the answer, if we're understanding what technology is doing to our workforce today, it's all about resource planning. Okay, so that we actually have a good idea of what our present workforce looks like, and what is the future workforce going to look like. And so this is why you've seen some of the articles. Again, not a big fan of Amazon overall, but Amazon, seeing these changes, is now offering training to a number of their warehouse workers to try and upskill them into jobs that are going to be replaced down the road, because they'll have robotics and all kinds of things that'll do the things those warehouse workers are doing right now. So do you see where the workforce is going? And then the idea is, how do we get in front of it? So if we know that these jobs are going to go away, or they're going to be diminished in numbers, do we have, I'll say, a 1 to 3 and a 3 to 5 year time frame. Now, why do I say that? Ideally, you want about a 3 to 5 year time frame, because that's the time frame you're looking at. Hopefully, you're not going to lay off everybody next month or next year because of these technologies, because you're going to have to slowly implement them to make sure that they work well. So you're probably looking at a 3 to 5 year time frame. However, one of the things that we know is that no one's repealed the business cycle yet. And within the next year to two, what happens if we have a global recession? Okay, that is going to cause an acceleration of how we implement these technologies. And so that's why I think you need to have a 1 to 3 year time frame. Scenario B, and that is that if we have to implement this much more quickly to downsize to meet the economic requirements, how do we do it? But if we've got that 3 to 5 year time frame, are we doing the training and upskilling of our employees to be able to move into new jobs? Are we developing them for alternative career paths? So it's not just about taking your job and doing the aspects that are higher cognitive function, but are we finding different career paths that the set of competencies you've got here might take you into a customer service job that you've never thought of. It might take you into a different career that you've never thought of before. And then last is the idea of building a financial buffer. Again, are we creating buffers for our employees so that when they get laid off or when they're displaced from these jobs, they either have the funding available to support them, or they have the funding available for them to be able to access training and development to develop those new skills. Again, I'm on the board of the Society for Human Resource Management. Just this past week or two, they laid off pretty much all of their customer service department. Okay, and they've outsourced all of that to another firm. And they were saying that one of the things that they did is they actually contacted Amazon, because they're located in the Washington, D.C. area. They contacted Amazon, who is, guess what, hiring customer service people right now. Okay, and so they've created the pipeline for their employees to apply to Amazon to be able to get new jobs. Now, there'll be lower paying jobs at Amazon, guess what? But it'll allow them to maintain some type of employment. Second is the impact-based view, okay, and this is where the groups of individuals that drive that disproportionate impact. Going back to the core capability, what is that capability we're trying to create that's driving customer value? And then thinking about who are the people that make up that capability. So I'm going to rush through this Starbucks example. But if you think about what Starbucks does, our experience with Starbucks is going into Starbucks and ordering a coffee, right? But you go back through their supply chain, how they partner with farmers in terms of the regulatory and environmental component to what they do. The coffee operations of, once the coffee comes in, how they roast it and all of that to differentiate Starbucks coffee. So if you think about, these are the 4 steps in Starbucks value chain. At each one of those steps, there are kind of critical processes that you have to be good at. And then there are technologies that you're using. So you need to understand that value chain if what ultimately Starbucks has to do is deliver this operational excellence to customers. Then we get into strategic talent management. How do we identify who those core groups are? And Lucien Alzari, who's the head of HR at Prudential Financial, and he came and guest lectured in my class, and the phrase that caught students' eyes is he goes, it's important to identify where you need to be world-class and where good is good enough. Okay, we can't be world-class at everything. That's too much of an investment. So we have to figure out what job groups are the ones that we need to be world-class at, and what are the other ones where we just need good, solid people. We're not trying to get the best people in those, we're just trying to get good, solid people. So again, to trace out Starbucks, at each one of those phases, there is a critical job group that drives their success. And this one of the barista and floater is, I think, one of the more interesting things because, if you've ever been in a Starbucks, you know that it's all about, the getting your coffee to you as quickly as possible. Right? So Starbucks knows that if there's a line beyond a certain length, people will just keep walking by. So you keep that line moving. And so, you know the barista, right? The barista is the one that makes the coffee. But what they identified as a critical job is the floater. And what the floater does is think about when you order the coffee, right? You go up, you go to the cash register, you order your coffee. Then somebody begins to prepare that coffee. And then somebody delivers that coffee at the end of it to you. Okay? And what the floater does is figures out where is the bottleneck at any given point in time. If the line is long, we need to get more orders. So you jump on the cash register and start taking orders. As soon as the line goes down, now where's the bottleneck? It's in the preparation. So now you jump on the cash register to start making the coffees. And then you see the people that are waiting. So now you jump into that. So the floater is what's critical to delivering that operational excellence. All right? Kind of not something you would think of normally, but this is what Starbucks identified as a critical job. Okay? And then what are the competencies you need? for each one of those jobs. And then what's your HR system have to look like to attract, motivate, develop, and retain those people? Okay, so this is that idea of if we're going to take an impact-based view of talent, we have to understand who the critical job categories are, what are the competencies we need from them, and how do we actually attract, retain, and develop those people. And last is the leadership-based, and this is some of the work we've done on executive succession. What we see is that there's all kinds of problems with mistakes. Okay, when you hire an executive or you promote the wrong CEO, there's a tremendous cost to the organization. Again, depending on what the estimates are, PricewaterhouseCoopers says CEO succession mistakes basically result in an average decrease of $1.8 billion in market value. When we talked about CEO or C-suite succession mistakes, again, one of the things we see is we ask people about the cost. If you hired a CMO or you hired a business leader at the C-suite level, and within a few months realize you made a mistake, how much did it cost you in terms of opportunity cost, in terms of direct costs? So these are costly mistakes. So getting executive succession is right, is an important thing. And we've actually talked with a number of board members about CEO succession. One of the reasons CEO succession is really difficult is that if you think about most of the hires that you've got people that have been in the organization for a number of years. You're viewing them in terms of their talent over time. You've got a lot of information on them. You're around all the time. When you start talking about choosing a CEO, it's the board that makes that decision, right? And they show up 4 to 6 times a year, usually not even on site. They might meet the people that are potential CEO successors at each one of those meetings for seeing them present for a while, maybe sitting next to them at dinner. It's a really unique and challenging decision that makes CEO succession really difficult. And it's kind of interesting, we were interviewing board members about successes and failures that they've seen at the CEO level in terms of the decisions they've made in the past. We actually weren't asking them this, we're just asking them about what happened that led them to make the wrong decision. But as they described why the people had failed, what became really fascinating is that when they would describe failed CEOs, they would describe them as arrogant, they had an inability to listen to others, and they were very selfish. They were always wanting more money, more perks, more stuff. Okay, and when they described successful CEOs, it was the exact opposite. Okay, they were people that were very humble, and I say relatively humble, very confident, right? So define humility not as thinking less of themselves, but thinking more of others, realizing that others had valuable information. They sought feedback, and they weren't worried about money. They certainly enjoyed the money, but that wasn't what was driving them in terms of a strong motivator. Okay, so let me get back to the beginning and kind of conclude here. So if you think about it, we've talked about this idea of aligning strategy with culture and with talent. So, what is it we align these 3 things around? The aha, as I again listened to Kevin talk about this, but then looked at what companies were doing, thinking about what really is strategy about, what is culture about, what is talent about. It's all around customer value. Why? Think about it. Strategy is defining customer value. What is the value we're going to offer to customers? Culture is aligning customer value with our company values. And talent is understanding who are the people that drive value to our customers. And so the idea is that if we're aligning those 3 components, it's all around customer value. What is it we're doing that's going to make customers want to buy from us instead of from our competitors? And so my conclusion with all of this is that good organizations have a good strategy, they have a good culture, and they have good talent. But great organizations create alignment between those 3 components. And that alignment is really around customer value.